Hello, everyone. Hello, our participants, guests of our seminar. And today we have a great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Richard Feldman, Emeritus University Professor of Philosophy at the University of Rochester. And today we have a more broader agenda. We have to start from the brief presentation of the brilliant book, as I suppose. It's a really present for all Ukrainian philosophical and not only philosophical community. This book, you can see content of this book, and I sent for you a link and PDF book in our invitation. It's a theory of argumentation, epistemological approach, ontology, critical thinking, and epistemological approach to argumentation. And I would like to invite Professor Christoph Lumer as the author, as the initiator, as a ruler of this book, please. And after that, we will go with our Professor Richard and discuss, listen his speech, and after that discuss. First of all, I can define our timing, maybe near 1 hour, 50 minutes, and after that conversation.
Okay.
Let's start, please.
Okay, thank you very much
Mm-hmm.
to Ina Golubovic for giving us this chance to present the book, and also many thanks to Richard Feldman for telling us more about the epistemological approach to argumentation. So let me tell some words about the book. This book is an anthology of the epistemological approach in argumentation. So I say something more about this book a bit later on, what's about the content. So the title is exactly as it is written here, The Theory of Argumentation, the Epistemological Approach. And the editors of this volume are Sergei Sekundant and myself. Something about the history of this book. It was Sergei Sekundant who took the initiative, not me. And this was already before the COVID-19 pandemic, when he approached me with his idea of this project to put together an anthology of texts from the epistemological approach of argumentation. He had also some ideas what to put into it. And so in the meanwhile, in the next years, this project grew. I introduced some more texts, and he proposed some more, and then we canceled some. Okay, there came out a very fat volume in the end. And it is fat because what you see here is only the content of the first volume. There should be a second one, but about that a little bit more later. And after that, as we had together all the texts we wanted to publish, I approached the authors and the publishers to get the licenses, and then in the end, Sergei managed to get the volume printed. And there's some complication. In the meanwhile, as we all know, there was the beginning of the war, and we first had the idea to publish all that in Russian, and it was no longer possible under the new government regulations that does not permit this. And so we had to translate that, or more precisely, Sergei Sekundant had to translate all that what he had already translated into Russian into Ukrainian. So we have here the first volume of the Ukrainian version, and I hope someday there will be also the second volume and also the Russian version of it. But let's see. This is an anthology, as I said, from the epistemological approach. The authors are Richard Feldman, our speaker of today. That is Harvey Siegel and John Biro. That's Mark Battersby and Sbalin. And it was Alvin Goldman and myself have contributed some text to this volume. Some words about the epistemological approach to this in argumentation theory. The characteristic of this approach is that, according to this approach, the aim of argumentation is to acquire knowledge, or a bit less strong, to acquire cognition, where cognition means something like a rationally justified belief of something. So this idea goes back already to Plato in his critiques of the sophists, and where he insisted on getting knowledge by philosophizing, and not only by persuading people to believe something without any justification. So the idea is that in the end, we have not only the belief in some thesis, but also the justification for it. Something has changed, obviously, since the times of Plato. That is that he insisted on too much on certain knowledge, and that has changed in the meanwhile. Now in argumentation theory, and that is the particular aim also of the epistemological approach, we have to broaden this, otherwise we wouldn't get enough truth, or at least acceptable opinions or beliefs. And that is, we have also to include uncertain beliefs, uncertain justifications, but that all has to be justified via epistemology. So we need, that is the idea in the approach, epistemologically justified criteria for when a thesis, when a proposition is true, or at least acceptable in the sense of plausible or probable, or acceptable in another sense, or true itself. And so these criteria tell us when a thesis fulfills or when it is true or acceptable. And the idea of the epistemological approach would be that we make people ascertain themselves that these conditions are fulfilled. So the arguments present some information about that these conditions, which are given by epistemological criteria, are fulfilled. And that is, in the end, the possibility of autonomy. So it's not simply that the person who argues is convincing the other, but that the addressee is convincing him or herself via verifying that the conditions for the truth or acceptability of the thesis are fulfilled. So I think that's from the philosophical side, this should be the best theory of argumentation we have. There are some others, but I think it is the best. Unfortunately, there are many, many other disciplines involved in argumentation theory, which think much less philosophically. So it is not the, let's say, the biggest approach in the broadest, distributed or accepted view of argumentation. But I think from the philosophical point of view, it should be the best, and therefore we would like to give attention to what Richard Feldman will say about it, and perhaps he will convince you that this is really a good approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Christoph. And I suppose this book will be very useful and fruitful for elaboration of the original theory of argumentation in Ukrainian philosophy, please. And let's start, dear Richard.
Okay.
You can
Okay,
start.
well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here and have a chance to meet with you, talk with you, and delighted, given everything that's going on there. I'm glad that you have a chance to think about issues like this with us together today. So thanks, and thanks to Christoph for that background discussion of the topic and for putting together this book. I'm delighted to be part of that too. So I will attempt to share my screen. We talk about arguments in philosophy elsewhere all the time, and we have an idea of what a good argument is. But as Christoph said in the introduction, there are a variety of views about how to think about that. And I will spend most of my time developing what we've called the epistemological account. But I want to begin by contrasting that with some other ideas about what a good argument is. So first, though, before we talk about a good argument, we ought to think a little bit about what an argument is. And by an argument, I certainly don't mean a dispute or a fight or that kind of thing where you get into an argument with somebody. It's rather what philosophers and others think about. And one discipline, one aspect of the field that thinks about that is logic. And you can think of arguments as sets of sentences, and logicians will construct formal systems in which they display sentences, and they can talk about the properties of combinations of sentences, and that's all logic. And I'll say a little bit more in a moment what they talk about as good arguments, but that's sort of one area where you think about arguments. Another is a more in arguments are things that people use when they talk to one another, when they're thinking about some topic and they want to express a point of view or tell the others about what they think and why, and they might give arguments. And so arguments, as opposed to just sets of sentences, are things people use in conversation and in thought. And that's closer to what I want to think about. And next, so those are what arguments are. One's the sort of logical conception, and the other is a more social kind of conception, where it's what people use in thinking and talking. So then what about good arguments? Let's say a couple words about the word good for a sec. Things can be good in any number of ways. Not thinking about arguments for a second, a good book. Well, a good book depends on the situation, what you're using it for. What's a good book if you're trying to find a story to read to a child might be different from what's a good book if you're trying to learn how to cook, or if you're trying to find some thick thing to set your computer monitor on so it stands up a little higher, where mainly what you want, a good book for that might be just a nice thick one, and it doesn't matter what it says inside at all. So good is very variable, and it can mean lots of different things or apply to many different sorts of things. So when it comes to arguments, I think there are three main ideas about what counts as a good argument. The first one is the logician's idea of a good argument. A good argument is one that meets the criteria, the logician's criteria. So a valid argument, if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. Or maybe they have some other notion of a inductively strong argument, but a different view about good arguments. But in any case, that's what a good argument is on the logician's conception. There's another one, another more social conception of good argument, and Christoph mentioned this early on. It's about persuasion, that a good argument is a persuasive argument. And that's a very common idea. Lots of people talk about that. And I'll just read two passages where people sort of express this idea. One author writes, "What are arguments for? This is deceptively easy. We exchange reasons with others in order to affect their beliefs or commitments. I give you reasons to believe something is true because I want you to believe that it's true, or to believe more strongly." So an argument is a tool of persuasion on this view. And people who think about this way of an argument in this way as tools of persuasion are prone to give lots of advice about what's effective and what's not. So here's one thing one author says about this. He says, "If the argument you find convincing doesn't resonate with someone else, find out what does. When conservative policies are framed around liberal values like equity and fairness, liberals become more accepting of them. The same was true of liberal policies recast in terms of conservative values like respect for authority. And here's his advice: use their morals against them. That is, use what they're apt to find persuasive in giving your arguments. So that's the advice about how to give a good argument. Here's another thing people who think about things this way might say. People don't like blizzards of evidence. They don't like lots and lots of information. So keep it short and simple. So that's the advice of the people who think about arguments in this way. And sometimes people think there's rules about how you ought to give arguments. So they'll say, well, you shouldn't give arguments with premises that you yourself don't believe. You should only use things that you believe. Now, my own idea about this is sort of, well, that's kind of odd. If your goal is persuasion, then whatever persuades, go ahead, do it. If your job, if you're the lawyer or the advertiser and you want to persuade people of something, well, go ahead, use whatever might be persuasive. Um, and so if persuasion is your goal, anything that persuades is fair game. But that's just another idea about what arguments are for. That there's another idea about what arguments are for that I think is really important. And Christoph too sort of alluded to this in his introductory remarks. Arguments are intended to give reasons to believe things. And they can help us better understand the world. There are formulations of our reasons for what we believe. Other people can give arguments for their reasons for what they believe. And we can use arguments in that way to try to achieve understanding. So arguments are sort of formulations of evidence for conclusions. And good arguments are ones that provide good evidence. So on this view, arguments are not tools of persuasion. Arguments are tools for clarifying our thinking and figuring things out and trying to gain knowledge and understanding. And that's the idea I want to develop here. And my point earlier on about discussing how the word good is used was to say, I don't think it's wrong to think of arguments as persuasive things. They are used that way. And it makes sense to think of a good argument as one that's persuasive. But I think it also makes perfect sense to think of arguments in the way I'm thinking about it as providing genuinely good reasons for things. And so that strikes me as the idea to be developed. So that's what I'm going to try to do, is say more about what arguments are for. Let me say just a little bit more about the contrast between the epistemic view and the other view. And before I do, did the slides come through?
We're fixed at the second one. Perhaps.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm fixed on the second one still.
So you're seeing mine. You can see mine?
I see arguments and then in Ukrainian text. Oh, too bad. Slider. Text slider.
All right. Well, I guess I'll just keep going. I'm not sure what the problem is, but
I see that someone is clicking on the fourth, but we are not seeing it. So no, now it is. So now it's the fourth slide. Sets of
what does it say?
Sets of sentences, argument sets of sentences. So we should be far ahead from that.
Okay. What does it say now? Good arguments, 3 views. Do you see that?
Not yet. We are seeing that you are with a cursor on it, but it's not the main slide now. Okay, now it's sets of sentences, things used by people in thought and conversation. That should be slide 5 or so.
Okay, well, I don't understand what's happening with these slides, but
But you go ahead. So
I will just keep going. So here's the thing about the logical view, thinking about arguments in terms of logic and how that sort of connects with the idea here. There can be arguments that, in fact, are logically valid, that meet the logical standard for being a good argument, but where we just don't understand that connection. Here's a simple example to illustrate the kind of thing I have in mind. Suppose you're a student in a logic class, and the expert teacher of the class says to you, here are two arguments. One of them is a valid argument, and the other one is not. And let's suppose you have every reason to believe this logic teacher. So you know one of the two arguments is a good one and is a logically valid argument, and the other is not. But you don't understand. You don't see how they work. So what I think in that situation, those arguments, neither one of them is any good for you. Neither one of them gives you any reason to believe its conclusion, even though you know one of them is valid. The logical facts of it are just beyond you. And the epistemic view sort of captures that idea. It says the argument has to work for you to be a good argument. It's not just its logical structure that matters. Thinking about the persuasive view, people are persuaded by all kinds of bad arguments. Arguments that might make use of really poignant examples, sometimes convince people of general conclusions, even though they're not good arguments. They can be convincing arguments or persuasive arguments. Or here's another one. Here, this is a well-known saying here, at least, goes back a long time to a writer, politician named Upton Sinclair, who said, it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. And the idea is roughly you won't believe things if you don't want to, if they're bad for you. And so you won't be persuaded by good arguments if their conclusions are ones that you don't want to believe. So persuasiveness and good argument come apart. And on the other hand, if an argument has a conclusion that you really do want to believe, then you might be persuaded by it, even if it doesn't really make sense, if it isn't really, from a more epistemological point of view, a good argument. So I think the better idea of a good argument, or at least the idea that fits with what I'm trying to understand, is that a good argument is one that provides good reasons to believe that its conclusion is true. So I'm gonna put that slide up here on my side. I don't know if it makes any difference to what you guys are seeing.
we are now seeing the full screen of this, the slide in full screen, and what the epistemological view gets right. And then the first sentence is logical connections can be beyond what we understand.
Okay, so it's seeming like it's taking a little while for it to get from my screen to yours. Because I was on that one a couple minutes ago. All right. So so here's the simple statement then of the epistemological view of arguments. An argument is a good argument only if its premises are good reasons to believe that its conclusion is true. Very simple. But there's things there that need explanation and clarification, and I'll spend the next several minutes on that. So one thing is, what do we mean by a good reason to believe something? When does something count as a good reason to believe? And here's an important distinction that I want to highlight for a minute. Suppose you're not feeling well, And you're told that if you are optimistic about your feeling better soon, it's a better chance that you will feel better soon. Or suppose that you're an athlete and confidence, you think confidence makes you perform better. So that's a reason to believe you're going to succeed. But depending on details, those are sort of practical reasons for believing something. They're reasons that why it's in your interest to believe something. They're not evidence that it's true. And so there's a distinction to be drawn, I think, between practical reasons.
Guarda, lì ci sono i guanti.
There's a difference between practical reasons and evidential reasons or epistemic reasons. I hope that idea is clear, but the idea is we use reasons in both ways, and beliefs. It's sort of important to understand. Beliefs sort of serve two different roles. Beliefs are ways of conceiving how the world is, thinking about how the world is. But beliefs also are motivating factors. Beliefs play a role in affecting our behavior. And those two things are different. And the examples I just described sort of turn on that, because while something might be useful in getting you or getting someone else to behave a certain way, that's not to say you have good reason to think that they're actually true, that they're evidence of their truth. And so the idea of good reason in this account of the epistemological view is that the good reasons have to be these kind of evidential reasons or epistemic reasons. So jumping ahead a little bit, so for an argument to be a good one, it has to be that it has premises that you have good reason to think are true and premises that support that conclusion. And you have to understand that connection between the premise and the conclusion. So this gets to one topic that I want to take a minute or two, a couple minutes on. And it's that there's a sort of relativism to the notion of a good argument. What's a good argument for one person might not be a good argument for another person, because they might have differences in their information, or they might have differences in their ability to understand the connection between the premises and the conclusion. And that strikes me, some people, get worried about relativism, think that's a bad thing. But I think this is exactly right. This is the right conclusion about arguments. That is, something can be a good argument for one person and not a good argument for another person. So this is something that some of the people who think about persuasiveness might want to say too, and on that I agree with them. And here's just one example to illustrate that idea. Imagine you're an expert on some topic, say about nutrition. You might give an argument, present an argument to your fellow experts for some conclusion about some particular food being especially nutritious and beneficial to people. And that argument might depend on a bunch of premises that they all know to be true and provide good evidence for them to believe that conclusion. But take a novice who might somehow be listening in on that argument. That person might not know anything about those premises, might not know whether they're good ones or not, whether that they're well supported or not, might not see how it all works. And so for that person, it might not be a good argument. And that strikes me as exactly how arguments are. That is what's a good argument for the person who has the relevant information to understand and use those premises might not be a good argument for a person who doesn't have that information. So I think the notion of good argument is relative to the person, relative to the person who hears it or thinks of it. So the epistemic view does have that kind of relativism built into it, and I think that's a good feature. What are you guys seeing now?
So we see relativism is relativism about good arguments.
Yeah,
And
okay.
yes.
Yeah, you're always a couple minutes behind where I am. I guess it takes a long time for the electrons to get over there. Um, okay. There's other details. I'll given the timing, I will go through some of these fairly quickly. You have to be justified in believing all the premises of a good argument. But here's a complicating thing. It's not just that you have to be justified in believing each of the premises of the argument. You have to be justified in believing all of them, their conjunction, the combination of them all. A simple example illustrates the idea very well. People familiar with some of this stuff, like the lottery paradox and all, will know. But here's a very simple example. Suppose you've invited, I don't know, say 10 people to a dinner party. And you're wondering whether they all will show up. You're setting the table and you want to put out all 10 place settings. So you're wondering if everybody will come. And you think about them each individually and you say, person one, yeah, she'll probably come, quite likely, 90% chance. And same with person number two, and same with person number three. And now suppose at the end of that you made up an argument, and premise one was person one will come, premise two was person two will come, and so on for all 10 of them. And so you get to the conclusion, you say those are all the people that were invited, and so you conclude, so they'll all come. Well, something's gone wrong there because each of those premises was perfectly good. That is, it's very likely. But you add up the likelihood of them not coming, each of them, any one of them not coming, and probably somebody won't come. Right? You with me? I mean, just the likelihoods can add up that way. If say there's a 1 in 10 chance for each person that they won't come, well, then when you get 10 people, more likely than not, somebody won't come, even though your premise that says each of them, with respect to each, they'll come is true. So for your argument that goes one by one has all good premises, but the conjunction of all those premises is not okay. And for an argument to be good, all the premises combined have to be ones that it's reasonable for you to believe. It can't just be one at a time that's good. Okay. So that's a second thing that we have to understand. So a better statement of the epistemological view goes like this. An argument's a good argument for a person just in case two conditions are satisfied. The first condition is the person's justified in believing the conjunction of the premises. And the second condition is the person understands or grasps the connection between the premises and the conclusion. And that second one is to deal with the idea about the logical connections you don't understand. Well, you have to get the connection for the argument to be a good one. You have to see how those premises connect to that conclusion. It can't just be that some abstract logical theory says they connect. You have to understand that. So that's the account of the epistemological view. My best statement of it, at least for now. And that's the slide I now have in my screen, and maybe in a minute or two, it'll be the one you see too. I hope so. All right. I'm gonna go on, and I have a number of potential objections and clarifications that I want to talk about. I'll do that for a little while, and then it will come up on time for me to stop, and so and open it up for discussion. And I look forward to doing that. And any issues, confusions, or objections, or concerns we can talk about. So. Here's a question. Here's a question that I find interesting to think about. Can there be good arguments on both sides of a question? That's a thing that's often said. You hear it, there's a discussion of some topic, and people say, yeah, there's good arguments on both sides. I hope that's a familiar idea. And if it is, that's a puzzling thing. Because if there can be good arguments on both sides, then that implies that having a good argument isn't enough to make it reasonable to believe a conclusion. Since there's a competing argument that has to be taken into account. And so this requires saying one of two things. One possibility is that you think that having a good argument isn't enough for it to be reasonable to believe something. Having a good argument for something isn't enough to make it rational or justified, reasonable to believe its conclusion. It depends on whether there's another competing argument that's better. Another way to think about it is to say that there's another condition on what makes an argument a good one. It's good only if the premises are justified, the premises support the conclusion, and there's no better argument on the other side. So you can think about things either way, I believe. But I think the best thing to say is actually there can be good arguments on both sides. There can be arguments that have reasonable premises, that support a conclusion, that you see that they do. And then to decide what's reasonable to believe, you have to weigh those arguments. That you have to be guided by the strongest of the good arguments, the one that better supports the conclusion. Here's another question about what counts as a good argument. It has to do with the role of background evidence. Suppose I'm out away from home. I arrive back at my house, and in the driveway, I see a car of exactly the kind that my wife drives. And I see that car and say I have somebody with me, and I say, oh, my wife's home. And the other person says, well, what's your argument for that conclusion? And I say, well, her car's there. There's a background assumption I'm relying on, namely that that's the kind of car she drives, and if that car is in the driveway, then she's at home. So here's the question. Is my argument the simple one, the car's in the driveway, so she's at home, or is my argument the more complicated one that includes the statement of the background evidence? So that that is so should we think about arguments as actually, when you think what's my argument, does it include the background evidence, or is that somehow just sort of assumed, but it's not part of the argument? So we could talk about that a little bit, but I think the better view is to say that it actually is part of the argument. And my argument is the one that includes these assumptions that I might not have made explicit, I might not have said, but I was relying on. And so background evidence is part of an argument. So that's that's how I'm thinking about good arguments. I want to take the last, maybe 5-10 minutes before I stop to think about some things that are implications of this that are of, well, to my mind, of interest and also somewhat puzzling. Suppose I'll take the more concerning one will come second. There's sort of 2 points here, but I'll do the easier one first. Suppose you're an unfortunate logic student. You're unfortunate in the following way. You have a confused logic teacher. Your teacher teaches you that certain arguments are logically valid when in fact they're not. And then you encounter an argument of the sort your teacher has taught you is valid. And you're a dutiful, conscientious student. You follow the advice of your teacher. You see the premises of the argument. You know that they're true. You say, oh, that's a valid argument, and you believe its conclusion. So if you're following the conditions on the epistemological view about good arguments, it looks like you're doing a good job. And so it looks like your bad logic teacher has turned a bad argument into a good argument. It looks like that is now a good argument for you. It's reasonable for you to believe that conclusion on the basis of that argument. Yet we started with the idea that the logic teacher was just confused. And so the epistemological theory seems to have the implication that the bad logic teacher can turn bad arguments into good ones. And that's perhaps puzzling. Here's a second version of the same kind of idea. Suppose you're in a situation where you're inundated with misinformation. You're given misleading or incorrect information about some situation. Specifics really don't matter, that we can think about the question in the abstract. But you're given lots of misleading information or incorrect information. And on that basis, you draw conclusions. And it's like an outside observer say, well, all those are bad arguments. They're all mixed up. There's false premises, there's mistakes, there's lots of misinformation that is at work in that statement of an argument. But the epistemological theory would have it that if it's reasonable for you to believe those premises, and you see how those premises lead to a conclusion, then that's a good argument for you. And so the epistemological theory seems to have the implication that people spreading misinformation can turn what would otherwise look like really bad arguments into good arguments for the people who are subject to that misinformation. So the idea is that the epistemological theory seems to have the result, sort of to make it too easy to have a good argument. That if you have sort of limited or confused information, you have good arguments for conclusion. So I hope the idea of that concern is clear. And my response to that will be very simple. I think that's exactly right. It's true that if the information you have supports certain premises and you see that those premises lead to certain conclusions, then those are good arguments for you. And that's one of the real sort of one of the real problems about misinformation and the world we're in now, where people can be in their intellectual bubbles and their information really does lead to conclusions that are very worrisome, can be very worrisome, and those of us on the outside can see to be seriously mistaken because given the information they have, those premises really do support their conclusions, and so those are good arguments for them. And so I think the right theory about arguments tells us that bad information can make problematic, what otherwise would seem like problematic arguments, make them actually good arguments, and that the people who are subject to that kind of misinformation, unless they have reason to dispute those premises, which they might not, then they have good reasons to believe the things that we might, from the outside, think are so unreasonable. They might actually have good arguments for their conclusions. So, I think I've talked long enough. So I hope I've given you a picture of what the epistemological theory says, how it works, and what its strengths are and what its implications are too. And those last implications are ones that I think are, as I say, are correct. But it's sort of interesting to me that it turns out that what we might have wanted to say are bad arguments really can be very good arguments given for people given their situations. So that's the epistemological, that's my take on the epistemological view about arguments. There's other details we could talk about if you like, but I've gone on for a while, so I think I will stop, and I'm happy to try to respond to any questions, to clarify things, or hear objections, or expand on any of this, whatever anybody might like. So thank you. And I'm sorry about the slides. I don't know what happened there, but
Thank you, dear Richard. Questions, suggestions, please.
I see a hand up.
Yes, Vladimir, please.
You're muted though.
Your questions, please, Vladimir.
Good evening. Thank you, Professor Feldman, for your lecture. In your paper, Good Argument, you use phrase premises are properly connected to
Yeah.
conclusions. And in your
Yes.
lecture, you use phrase premises rationally connected to conclusion. Could you please describe the criteria of such a connection?
So good. Yeah, that's a good and hard question. Here's what I now think. I think I don't know that I was when I first wrote that paper, I'm not sure I saw things quite the same way. I think what has to happen for an argument to be a good one for you, that I'll use the word grasp the connection between the premises and the conclusion. You see that the premises are connected to the conclusion. You understand that they're connected. So two things to try to elaborate on that. One is that can sound like a sort of overly intellectualizing things, that only a logician, only somebody who's really thought about things can sort of be in a position to grasp these kinds of connections. I don't think That's right. I mean, I think all of us all the time can understand connections. We pretty naturally move from one thing to another. We can see that if one thing is true, then some other thing is true. And so we reason about things. We do grasp connections all the time. So I don't think the condition is overly intellectual. It doesn't mean you have to have a theory about how arguments work. Ordinary folks in ordinary situations do grasp connections between things. A second thing about that is that going back to the sort of misled logic student, I think in that case, the connection that the person grasps is not simply between the premises of the argument and the conclusion where the teacher has misled the student about that connection. Part of his premise, part of his reason for his conclusion is that the teacher said there's a connection. And so, in a way, his real argument is premise one, premise two, the teacher says premises one and two imply the conclusion, and so the conclusion is true. And he sees the connection there. He grasps that connection. So that's what I'm thinking. The connection doesn't have to be a connection that, the formal logicians will say amounts to logical validity. It can be weaker than that. It can be probabilistic. It can be by means of best explanations. So you can see, well, if this is true, then the best explanation of that is that. And so you draw a conclusion because it's best explanation. So induction, best explanation, logical validity too. So all of those kinds of things can count as what back then I would have called appropriate connections. And now I'll say you can grasp that there's that kind of connection. And the reason I want to focus on the grasp rather than just the existence of the connection is there can be a logical connection that you don't get. And if you don't get it, then I don't think the argument does anything for you. Does that help at all?
Yeah, I understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Can I ask you about, I follow for your bio and you were the dean of the undergraduate college. You are close to organization of the teaching process. And tell me, please, what is the role of theory argumentation courses in the schedules of students' programs?
That's interesting. So it's going to vary from university and college, from one college to another. Here at Rochester, I years ago used to teach a course. It was called Reason and Argument, and it taught it taught a version of argumentation theory. The idea of the course was to teach students how to, say, read an essay and extract from that essay what's the conclusion, what are the premises used for that to support that conclusion, what are the arguments given, and then to evaluate those arguments. And the method for evaluating the arguments that I taught was very much along the lines of the kind of view I spelled out here. So it was just a course that students could take. It wasn't an elective. It wasn't a required course. But I was friendly with and had some connections to the person who ran what was called the freshman writing program, and every first year student had to take a writing course, and these were small courses taught mostly taught by graduate students in English or history or philosophy, maybe some other disciplines. And that person got very much interested in arguments. And so we talked a lot. And so a part of what they taught was not like the whole course I did on arguments, but it was built into how they talked about writing. And the idea was to teach students to think about arguments and reasoning and understanding that. So here, at least, it was a thing that was kind of spread across the curriculum, and all the students had to take a writing course. And so some of them did, get more of that than others. But that's not true everywhere. At some places, there might be nothing at all like this, or it might just be something that, some students will take and others not.
Thank you, thank you. And Professor Sergei Secundant, he is initiator of this book that we are presenting now with. Please, your questions, Sergei Secundant. After that, Andrzej Bronk.
Thank you very
Just
much.
first of all, Sergei, after that, Professor Andrzej Bronk.
That's okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for a very interesting report. I have a question. The concept of a good argument is a value-based one. Whether an argument is good or bad depends on the criteria. If the criteria are subjective, then a concept of good becomes relative, which is bad when we are trying, for example, to reach a consensus that would lead to a mutual beneficial outcome, not only in the short time, but also in the long time. Therefore, John Barrow and Harvey Siegel opposed the subjectivism and relativism of rhetorical, pragmatic, and pragmatic dialectical approaches. My question is, how you think is a subjective approach in the epistemological argumentation theory is possible?
All right, so good question, and let me. Sorry.
A rhetorical approach and pragmatic dialectical approach tell about also tell about rationalism, understanding, reasonable argumentation, but they don't understand warum we must develop a special epistemological approach.
Okay, let me.
Special John Barrow и Harvey Siegel holds that only objectivism and normativism epistemological theory is justified. Subjectivism is impossible. How do you answer?
Let me see if this. I'll say a little bit. And let me see if this is responsive to your point, maybe to their points. So there's two key words there: subjectivism and relativism, and we have to be careful about how we understand them. And I think philosophers and others use them in lots of different ways, and they can get pretty confusing. So here's one way to think about things. subjectivism can mean something like if you think it, then it's true for you. I mean, it's, if I like vanilla and you like chocolate, well, then that, our tastes are subjective. It's sort of just up to us. I don't mean to endorse anything like that about good arguments. It's not a good argument because you think it is. You could be mistaken. You could have an argument that whose premises are not justified. There are premises where there's no good connection between the premises and the conclusion, even if you think there is. And so it's not, by my standards, a good argument, even though subjectively you might say that it is. You might think that it is. So that's subjectivism. Then there's relativism. And if what that means is what's a good argument for one person might not be a good argument for another person, my view does have that implication. And I think that's a strength of the view. I think that's right in that given differences in what information we have, differences in what we might be able to understand, it might be that some argument really does have the effect of giving you a good reason to believe some conclusion because you have greater understanding or different understanding than I do. And so, what's a good argument for one person might not be a good argument for another. I gave an example during the presentation concerning expert on food science and a novice. And what's a good argument for the experts might not be a good argument for the novices because it depends on the extra knowledge that the experts have. And so I think that kind of relativism is right. Finally, back to I think where you started, if I understood correctly. I mean, we do on many issues want to try to reach consensus and try to get collective understanding. I think that's a laudable goal. I believe that's right. And by exchange of arguments, we can do that or hope to do that. I mean, it's not always going to be successful, but we can try. And I think understanding arguments in the way I do at least aligns with that nicely because when I present my argument to you, if say we disagree at the starting point, now you have some new information, and that can affect what's a good argument for you. It might have the effect of undermining an argument you previously accepted. So, um, but that's a little different. I mean, from my perspective, it's one thing whether I persuade you, and it's another thing whether I've given you good reasons to believe a different conclusion. And those are different things. So this I don't see any incompatibility, any tension, and any reason to think that the kind of epistemological account of arguments is mistaken in light of that. Now, I don't know if I've answered all your questions, but I hope what I said is relevant. So please elaborate or respond.
Yes, thank you. It is. We have problem. Putin has own values. We have Ukraine have own values. We must to reach. We must reach consensus. Consensus, good consensus for Russian and Ukrainian.
Yeah, well, we
This
do,
problem.
and differences in values can make are very hard to know exactly how to deal with. And among the questions to think about there is about whether values, and is to what extent are there sort of right and wrong values? I mean, you can apply it in some domains, like, I don't know, taste and food or something. We just like different things, and there's no right or wrong about it. There's just differences. Other domains, it looks different. And then if that's right, and if there's sort of truths about what's better than what, then we can argue. There's room for rational argument about those matters too. And ideally, people will actually follow the evidence. They'll listen, but it might not work that way all the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Professor Andrzej Bronk, please.
I'm very happy that I can speak with you, Professor Feldman. It was a very interesting lecture. First, my question, do you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, oh, that's okay. Let me first introduce myself. I am a retired professor from the Catholic University in Poland. And now I am speaking from Lublin. I taught many years the theory of argumentation. So I have some questions for explanation. First, it was my impression that you avoided the word justification, which has a huge literature and many monographs. The second remark, why do you call your views? I would like to see if it is a theory. Would you use the word theory of argumentation? No, okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, why do you call it epistemological? Because most of your notions have been psychological. Persuasion, conviction, seeing connections, grasping connections. That's not logical notions at all. And then last my remark. When you take P, as the logicians do, P is, then you have such combination. P can be true, P can be justified, P can be accepted by the persuaded person, and so on. P not justified, not persuaded, true, not justified, persuaded, and so on. A lot of combinations. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you for your question, and let me try to answer. But please, if I don't quite get it, let me follow up. So, I think I'll start with this. I did talk some about persuasion. And that's a psychological notion. I agree. You said sort of, isn't it psychological? And I think that's right. At least when I use the word epistemological, I'm thinking something not psychological. That is, something is a good reason for something else, and that's if it's evidence for that thing, if it actually supports it. And that can obtain whether or not you understand that, whether you realize that. So the epistemological relation is not a psychological relation. The evidential support relation is not a psychological notion. It's not whether you will believe this on the basis of that. It's whether it gives you good reason to believe that thing. And it's the good reason, the idea of good reason that's sort of built in there. That's the epistemological thing as opposed to the psychological relation.
You are saying good reason. Why not just justified reason?
I'd say that. I'm happy to use that word. I mean, that word's okay with me too. And lots of what I've written uses the word justified. And at some points in the talk, I did use the word justified. Like you have to be justified in believing the premises. But that's not that's not a purely logical concept nor a psychological concept. It's a epistemic concept and evaluative concept in that way. But one other thing I want to say, I do think that whether something is a good argument for you depends in part on something psychological. It depends on whether you can understand it, and that's a psychological fact about you. So if you can't understand something, well, then it's not like you can't understand the premises of an argument. You don't know what they mean, or or you don't see how they connect to the conclusion. Then an argument making use of that information isn't a good argument for you. And so there is this psychological element to it, but it's not about persuasion. It's about understanding.
Do you mean that understanding is an epistemological notion or psychological one?
I think that's a psychological notion.
I read a very great book about Gadamer's hermeneutics, where
Yeah.
the notion of understanding is the central notion. No, anyway, I am not going to. Thank
All
you very
right.
much, Professor Feldman.
Okay, well, thank you. I hope that addressed your questions. I am interested in that because there's this hard differences between what's psychological and what's
Yeah,
epistemological and what's
yeah,
logical. I mean,
yes, yes, yes.
they're very
They are very close.
subtle kinds of things, and I think this whole topic is largely, for my mind, about something more epistemological. By that I mean it's sort of evaluative. It's saying what's good reasoning. It's not as opposed to what's persuasive reasoning. And the persuasive I take as a purely psychological thing. And, if something persuades you, that's a fact about your psychology.
Thank you very much.
And maybe I'll just say one last thing because it's one of my favorite things to say. I used to teach critical thinking a lot, and one of the things that I'd say is my goal is to make it the case that what persuades you are good arguments. That what's persuasive and what's rationally good come to coincide, that it doesn't start that way, that you can be persuaded by bad arguments, you can fail to be persuaded by good arguments. And what I hope can become true is that those two things coincide, that you stop being persuaded by bad arguments and start being persuaded by only good ones. So that's sort of a way of thinking about what the goal of teaching argumentation and critical thinking is.
Thank you. Please, Dmitry Lishenko, your question.
Yes. Hello, thank you very much for the talk. It was very interesting. I have a question, maybe two. First of all, how do you deal with the problem of logical omniscience, or maybe some equivalent problem, maybe epistemological omniscience? I mean, when do you know or don't know the all entailments from the premises which you endorse? Okay, this is the first question. Can you?
But should we take them in order? Okay. So if I'm understanding the question, I mean, my view is that there can be logical consequences of things that say you know to be true, or things that you justifiably believe. And if you don't grasp, understand, see the connection between those premises and those conclusions, some of those say distant logical conclusions, then those distant logical conclusions aren't justified for you. And the argument that goes from those premises to that conclusion isn't a good argument for you. So I deal with the problem of logical omniscience. I don't know if this is a fair way to put it, by saying, well, we don't have it. That is, we're not logically omniscient.
That's what actually.
And because we're not logically omniscient, we don't know, we aren't justified in believing, we don't have good evidence for those conclusions whose connection we don't grasp. So in a way, logical connections in a certain way are just more external facts about sort of how things are. But if we're unaware of them, if we're ignorant of connections, then they don't have any bearing on what it's reasonable for us to believe. You with me?
Yes, yes, I follow. Actually, as I thought, and my second question is entailed by. Actually,
Okay. Okay.
You see, I didn't get the method of evaluation of good reasoning or entailment. I don't get it. I think that there are many, actually lots of logical tools, epistemic logic, for example, Kripke models and so on, other logical tools which can be which can help to evaluate good reasoning from not good reasoning. We can, but I didn't get how your epistemological view evaluate this is good, this is not good. I'm persuaded. I wasn't persuaded. For example, can you a little bit more?
I'll say a little bit.
Elaboration. Yeah.
I'll say a little bit. It won't be enough. I mean, I think it's a good and fair question. I can proceed by examples, and I like simple examples. So, if for example, I wake up one morning, I look out the window, and I see that the driveway is all wet, and there's some water dripping off the trees. I think it rained. And I think I have a good reason to think that it rained. And the argument that sort of spelled that out, that said, you know, everything's wet and whatever, given my background information, that would provide a good kind of inductive or maybe best explanation kind of argument for the conclusion that it rained. And so that's an example. Now, maybe I'm not sure if what you were thinking about is the idea that that can be sort of made more formal and put into a more formal system, and maybe it can. Fine with me if it can. What I want to resist is the idea that just because there's a logical connection between some premises and a conclusion, that gives you a reason a good reason to believe the conclusion. You have to grasp that connection. That's the other thing that I wanted to sort of build in. So maybe there's two ideas there. One, the kind of connection there has to be is less than what a formal system, deductive system would require. And the reason for the rain example is, well, it doesn't guarantee that it rained. I mean, there could have been somebody's sprayer, or I don't know, somebody could have come by with a hose. So it doesn't require that. So it's not logical in that sense of logical. But there is, on the other hand, the mere existence of a logical connection isn't enough. It has to be a grasped or understood connection. You have to see that. So that's the answer to the logical omniscience question. So I don't know. That's a little bit. I don't have a formal explanation of what counts as adequate evidence or good reasons.
Okay, it's okay.
I don't know if I talked about what you were hoping I'd talk about.
I mean, yes, I get it, but I have doubts. I mean, yes, for example, in intuitionistic logic, we need to grasp, we need a method to construct some outcomes, but mathematics and other methods, actually, they work for us. Yeah. Even if we cannot grasp it, they help us to do it. Science began when we could not, for example, make a prognosis without mathematics. Mathematics tells us that, for example, there will be such an outcome if you have such and such premises, and we cannot grasp it. Our cognition, our epistemic, psychological and other cognitive accessibility is very limited actually. How can we evaluate without those external methods, formal, maybe mathematical? In reasoning, we should rely more on, even if in some specific, I don't know, informal way, but on some specific, let's say, logically justified methods of making entailments, predictions, whatever. Even if probabilistic, for example, in the case of rain out, it is rain. Okay, for example, let's take that logical class. Take simple modus ponens. If it is raining outside, then it is wet in the street. It is raining outside, then it is wet in the street. For example, students sometimes do not get that if you affirm the consequent of the implication, it is illogical, and only after some reasoning, this evaluating in their minds, in their consciousness, the outcomes, they see, okay, this is logical. But when the example is not so obvious, but with the same logical structure, they just don't get it. For example, if I'll take some, I don't know, mathematical example with the same, absolutely the same logical structures, they just don't get it. Then I return to, it is raining outside, it is then wet in the street, and look out, and so something like that. So, I mean, grasping, understanding, getting with our minds is very, very limited, and I don't see how it can work without external methods. I don't know, maybe some intersubjective validating, but it is not possible for every case actually.
I certainly don't mean to say that teaching, I mean, the sort of thing you just described, can't help people to see connections that perhaps they previously didn't see, or make them realize that some connection they thought they saw, they were mixed up about, they were confusing. So I certainly agree that kind of instruction can make a difference. But I also think and sort of want to preserve the idea that people who don't have that kind of instruction also can understand understand the merits of some arguments, can sort of reason about things, can come to learn stuff through argument. So I don't want to say that you have to have that any grasp of the you don't need the formal training in order to understand. People deal with arguments all the time, and in
some kind of expertise,
they do pretty well.
Yes.
Sorry.
I mean, you mean some kind of expertise. We must rely on the grasping of experts, not just everyone, for example, or everyone.
Well, we do have to rely on experts for an awful lot. I mean, most everything we're relying on some other people in some way or other. There's very little that you can know all on your own. I mean, maybe I can know I feel warm now, but sort of nothing much else. But sort of anything about the world does require information from others. So I completely agree with that. But I also think people don't need experts about logic or probability or philosophy in order to know a lot about the world around them too. I mean, they can know some stuff through perception, through ordinary interactions and the like too. So I don't want to sort of, you don't have to be an expert in that kind of way in order to know things. So I want to preserve the idea that ordinary folks have ordinary knowledge.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Christoph Lumer, please, your question, suggestion.
Okay, thank you very much. So my question goes in the same direction as that of Dimitri. So I was wondering about rational connections between the reasons and the conclusion.
Yeah.
If you have something more to say about that, I would be very glad. What are the kinds of connections that there are? Is there a systematization of them? What are the backgrounds? And so things like that. I would like to hear a bit more about that. Thank you.
Okay.
If it's too much,
I wish I had more to say than I do. I mean, I have these ideas. So I think in addition to sort of the deductive connections that we're familiar with from some kind of formal logic, I mean, there are inductive or pattern-like connections that we get and that we can provide for rational connections. So I mean, just all the time we do things. So I turn on the stove and I heat up the oil or butter in the frying pan and then throw it, and I'm about to put my egg in and I believe it's going to cook. And I think I have a good reason to think that based on experience. I think there's other things that are more like the car in the driveway thing, where it's kind of a best explanation. I can recognize that the car in the driveway is just like my wife's, and I can recognize the fact that it's possible there's somebody else who's visiting and has a car just like that, but the better explanation is that it's my wife's. And so that can make it reasonable for me to conclude that it is hers. And so that kind of best explanation thing is another example of what I'd regard as a rational connection. There's hard questions about how induction and best explanation fit together and whether maybe in the end they're kind of the same thing or one subsumes the other. So there's that. I don't have a formalization of it. Not, I mean, that's just sort of not my way of thinking about things. Not that I oppose it. It's just I don't have it. And I guess the answer is sort of I want to sort of reiterate the points that come up a number of times, but I do think that there is something to the idea that connections have to be grasped, understood, seen in order for them to make any difference to what it's reasonable for you to believe. The mere fact that there is some connection is not enough. It has to be understood. So I'll stop there, but I welcome suggestions or to be pushed further on it. I mean, it's hard, but that's what I have for now.
No, thank you very much. So I'm thinking about.
I don't know if that addressed what you were wanting at all.
No. I would have liked to get more, of course.
Yeah, well, so would I.
Thank you very much.
Maybe I'll just say, I think, though I don't have a sort of systematic theory, I mean, I think we see it all the time as we sort of navigate through the world. We see connections between things, and there are instances of the sort of thing I'm talking about.
No, it's one of the many projects I'm working on, so therefore.
Okay, well, I'd be interested to get to see the results. So, all right, good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for this dynamic discussion. Any questions, suggestions, propositions? Thank you for all participants of this meeting at the time of the May, very hot month for our academic year. And thank you, Professor Richard Feldman, for your presentation, for this dynamic discussion. And I suppose when our participants have to read this book, questions, suggestions, and propositions will be more and more and more. I suppose.
Well, I'd welcome hearing from people if they have questions, objections, whatever. I'm always eager to hear. So.
My questions, at least, do you have in your community in the United States, or maybe with your international colleagues and friends, such kind of discursive club or such communication like our seminar for discussion, such kind of questions or not?
Do we have that? So sure. I mean, there's lots of different organizations. There's a thing, the American Philosophical Association, and they have there's meetings that they have, and that covers all topics in philosophy. And then there's regional meetings, and then there's conferences in about more specific topics. So there's annual meetings that are more about epistemology, others that are about ethics, others that are about history of philosophy. So. Sure, there's lots and lots of things like that. Yes.
Mm-hmm. No, especially about theory of argumentation.
Oh, theory of
Theory
argumentation.
of argumentation in such
I'm sorry, I
kind of
misunderstood the
living
question.
conversation.
Yes. Um, there are, I'm not sure what their current status is, but there are some journals that are about that sort of focus on that. And there are groups that meet pretty regularly and for presentations of papers and the like. I've not lately been part of that, but it does happen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you very much. And we will stay in touch because I hope that some reviews will have after our presentation of your speech and this book. And I suppose we can publish this in one of the American magazine, maybe.
And maybe so. I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Because it's a event for us. It's a very interesting proposition from Odessa and Siena specialists and all international participants who were involved in this book. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you all. Very nice to meet you and enjoyed this. So thank you.
And please, for our participants of our seminar, we are going to June seminar, and please, we will have very brief break. Thank you very much, Dmitry Sipieti, professor, our Ukrainian professor of philosophy and specialist in philosophy of mind. Are you here, Dmitry? Dmitry proposed speaker for next seminar. It will be 1st of June. 1st of June, same time. Raymond Tallis, philosopher, specialist in the philosophy of mind, clinical neuroscientist, physician, and so on. And we will continue to talk about mind, cognition, and next topic will be with the accent on the neuroscience. Stay with us. Have a nice evening, nice May, and please be safe.
Okay. Thank you.
Very much. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.